Hey everyone, it's Janice from the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm excited to tell you that my book is now for sale. It's called Divorcing Religion, a memoir and survival handbook, and I'll make sure you have a link in the notes for that. And also I want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and become a member of my YouTube channel. Take care. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious trauma recovery coach. My guest today is a fellow Canadian. She's an author, speaker, and cult survivor with a powerful story to share. Beth Granger was the first staff child born at Grenville Christian College, an elite private boarding school in Canada, which was actually a cult. After her escape at age 31, she didn't become a sex worker or go straight to hell, as her cult leaders predicted. Instead, she earned her Bachelor of Education at Queen's University, got hired after her first teacher interview, married a police officer, and became a mother of two. Beth has been recovering from complex PTSD, benzo withdrawal, and a lifelong eating disorder. He also helped spearhead a 16-year landmark class action lawsuit against her abusers. It's just amazing. Beth is dedicated to shedding light on the long-term impact of trauma inflicted by weaponized religion. Born and raised, Surviving the Cult Was Only Half the Battle is her first book. And of course, the word raised there has a Z in it. Welcome, Beth. I'm so pleased that you could join me today.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. I'll never forget the email I first got from you when you were reading my book, and I was so scared that nobody would actually endorse it. And you were the first person who told me that you were reading it and that you wanted to meet me someday and maybe have a chat on the podcast, and I was delighted.
Yay! Yeah, and I see you've got the poster board behind you as well, which turned out really nicely. The cover of your book, everything, it looks really good, and I was so honored to preview the manuscript, and it's just such a powerful story. I can only imagine how challenging it was to write it out and get in touch with all those memories again. So you're years out of it now. You've been out of it for a long time, but the court case just finished recently. And please tell us how that ended.
How it ended? Well,
Yes.
It ended well. We won. We were the first. I don't know if you said this, but we were the first historical abuse case to win at trial in Canada. So it was a landmark case, as you said. And I had no idea that if we made it to trial, we'd be the first. I had no idea how hard it would be to go through it. But I'm sure we'll get into the whole discussion of how hard it is to recover when you leave a coercive control, a high-powered religion or a cult. And for me, the court case was an essential part of my recovery, and we'll get there, I'm sure. But, just spoiler alert, it wasn't the only thing that helped me recover. It was one of many things, but it forced me. When I joined the lawsuit, I had this feeling that, unlike anything else that I might experience, it would force me to heal. And I didn't know how, and I didn't know how long it would take. I thought, maybe 5 years.
16 years is a hell of a long time. That is just, I didn't even know a court case could last that long.
I know. And it would have been longer if we hadn't. Well, we won in trial, but then when we went through to the next stage, which in Canada, class action lawsuits are separated into several trials. So we won the first big trial, but then we would have had to go, we had the option to go to mini trials where each member would have to prove that how damaged they were and that the school had damaged them. And we finally decided to settle and rather than put people through that, because I knew firsthand how incredibly triggering and debilitating the whole process was to be under cross-examination. So it would have been longer if we had gone that route.
God. Wow. And I'm surprised yours was the first one, because I would have thought the Indigenous people, our First Nations people, Métis, and Inuit have suffered so tremendously, again, at the hands of religious people, through the church-run and government-run residential schools in Canada. So I'll be interested to see what kinds of other cases maybe follow on the heels of this landmark decision in your favor. And does it mean anything as far as, will any guilty parties face anything as a result of the things that they did?
Well, just to clarify, with the Indigenous boarding schools, they did win, but they settled. So they never went to trial. So they never had to go to any trial, and they didn't have to undergo cross-examinations and such. Right. So theirs was so egregious and so terrible that within, I think it was only 4 years after they launched their lawsuit, everyone settled with them because they knew they had no leg to stand on. So just to clarify that. But as far as our lawsuit goes, no. I mean, one of the problems with a civil action is that it's not forcing the perpetrators to apologize. And in fact, they defended themselves the entire process and even lied under oath repeatedly.
Oh my God.
But what it did do was it set a precedent, and it set up an example for insurance companies. So anyone who's some sort of a religious school, religious troubled teen program, they better wake up, because they won't be able to keep insured if insurance companies learn lessons from these kinds of lawsuits. Wow. And so our school, when we went bankrupt and closed the doors, that's when we launched the lawsuit. And then they sold the school for almost nothing, so we wouldn't get any money from that, right? But the insurance companies were left holding the responsibility, if you will. And also, I would say, anyone who's when Grenville closed, they tried to keep the wonderful reputation alive, right? And they tried to, have this big celebration of everything they had accomplished, and that wonderful reputation exists no longer. I mean, if you Google Grenville Christian College, you get nothing but the headlines of the abusive nature of the school. So we did accomplish that. We did show the truth of what was really happening there. Right.
Yeah. The truth eventually did come out, and it's fascinating and so maddening to learn that the perpetrators of the abuse even lied under oath. And part of it, I'm certain, has to do with the self-righteous smugness of being deeply religious, and them actually believing their own bullshit.
Yes.
That they did everything for the good of the school, for the good of the students. And this is, of course, also how, unfortunately, a lot of religious parents react when, in fact, they have been abusing their children, just calling it discipline, Christian discipline, spare the rod, spoil the child, all that nonsense. And it's just, it's terrible. It has to stop. So thank you very much for bringing us up to speed on the court case, and for letting me having some greater understanding about the Indigenous cases that have happened in Canada as well. And so your parents were on staff at what was then just like an Anglican Christian school, and you had other siblings, and then you were born actually, as a when your parents were staff members there, and then you grew up living on that campus. But it, like other cults, the children were separated eventually from their parents and their families, because the cult leaders have to have ultimate control, and they couldn't do that if they didn't split the families up.
Yes. So I don't know if we mentioned this, but when I was 3, so I was born there. But when I was 3, our school fell prey, if you will, to 2 women called the Mothers, who were leaders of a commune in Cape Cod called the Community of Jesus. And so under their influence, our school became like an institution of paranoia and, think Handmaid's Tale, like prequel. But they set out, it was the whole cult handbook, if you will, looking back. And one of the biggest things they did to establish control was to dismantle families. So I was 4 when I was taken away from my parents, and I wasn't raised by them. I was passed from one family to another, and we were constantly moved. So you never could develop close ties to anyone. And the reason is that idolatry, meaning the love of anything but God, was one of the highest, worst sins. And they needed to eradicate that. And they believed that parents were blind to their children's sin, so they shouldn't be raising their children. Of course, what I learned as a 4-year-old was that it was a sin to love me. And that is,
That's
it almost makes me cry every time I think about that, because it's so deeply devastating to anyone but a child. I mean, so, and then you can imagine, it's going to affect you for life. And so, yeah, that's one of the tactics that they used. And then, we can get into so many more. Public shaming was another really coercive, terrible, destructive tactic that they used to break people down. And
they did that for children, the students, and the staff. Everybody, nobody was safe from the mothers, the mothers who, I'm guessing, ironically, actually never had children of their own.
They actually did, but they were found out to be, ironically, a lesbian couple. That came to light, once the school closed. But they had started out being married to men, and then they just got rid of their husbands.
Oh, wow! Wow!
And
okay, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's crazy town, but these public shaming sessions were called light sessions, and we were supposed to live in the light, so everyone was publicly attacked for their sins, and you never knew when you would be next. And I remember distinctly being about kindergarten when I started being exposed to them and watching adults being publicly humiliated and shamed. And it wasn't long before I had my, they were targeting little kids in light sessions. I mean, it was a constant practice.
And you better have something ready to confess then.
Yes. Or they would, either you had to confess, or they would attack you for imagined sins that they said you had. And if you didn't agree, everything got worse for you. So you learn to take it, but you also learn to internalize the shame and believe what they were telling to you. So, I mean, talk about lifelong harm, and this happened to poor students whose parents were paying $20,000 to send them to this school per year, or more. And all of a sudden they're in the middle of a mass light session with sometimes 300 people, where they're stood up and they're completely attacked for sometimes things like having a bad attitude, sinning in your mind. It wasn't usually stuff like breaking rules, because if you broke a rule, then it was like smoking. You'd get a lot of flack for that, and you'd be put on discipline. But the worst ones were the kinds of sins, you're haughty, and they would yell at girls for being whores, Jezebels, just because they were pretty. It was, the shaming was over the top, and yet I normalized it all. I didn't realize what was going on. I didn't
And
realize that it was
your
damaging.
parents, right, right. Because how do you know? It's your only experience.
Yeah.
That's what you're growing up in. It's so hard to imagine parents allowing this to happen to their own children. The parents, not
I
like the
know.
parents who were staff, were unaware that this was going on because they also were being shamed. But so that the atmosphere of paranoia,
Hmm.
fear, constant fear, and there's nowhere you can run away to for safety. There's nowhere. I mean, usually we can run to our parents for some kind of safety or other family members or something. But if your entire life is being lived
Yeah.
out on that one campus and there's no escape, and then we also run into issues like we would prefer that we're not the ones getting picked on. So then we're relieved when it's someone else, even though we know that person doesn't deserve it. And then we
Hmm.
feel we're injured in that way.
Yeah.
Because we feel guilty for feeling relief that we're not the ones being abused. And this certainly goes on in families as well, and domestic abuse
Yeah.
violence situations.
Well, they set
It's
up a
just,
spy network too, and that's very culty that,
wow.
everyone is expected to turn people in for, a long list of rules that were both written and unwritten. So you, like, to your point, as long as you were on the attack or you're the one turning someone in, or in during a light session, if you stood up and spoke against the person on the hot seat, it would take pressure off you and you would be a bit more safe. So they were training everyone to do that. And that's what the prefects, who were regular students, they were taught to do that too. So you learn to not trust anyone, and they went out of their way to not let very close relationships form. So even amongst the boarding students. So if you sent your daughter or your son to this school and you thought they were going to come away with really good friendships, likely they did not, and they came away shattered. So yeah, it was, yeah. And we
Well,
haven't even
and
gotten to, yeah, sorry.
no problem. So the vision that the rest of Canada was being fed about
Hmm.
this school was that it was a absolutely top-notch premier
Yeah.
school, that the education, the arts programming there, was
Yes.
phenomenal, winning all these awards, the choirs, these sorts of things, and of course athletics and so forth. But the price that the students were paying
Yeah.
to kind of be considered top-notch in these categories was just that people were dying inside.
Yeah, and it's even worse because they couldn't express or explain the truth of what was going on. They didn't understand it themselves. And then a lot of kids tried to tell their parents, and the parents wouldn't believe them. Or if their parents got concerned and contacted the school, they were gaslighted,
Yeah. Hmm.
and told lies, and basically the school would say, well, your child is, in rebellion, or they're just lying, or they're just trying to
Oh, no.
manipulate you. And even to this day, after the entire lawsuit of 16 years and we win, there are many students who have told me their parents still don't believe it. They don't believe the truth of what was going on. And
Wow.
and so it's such a mind fuck, if you will, because
Yeah.
you said, like, it appeared to be an incredible school. And I mean, our motto was excellence to the glory of God. But the other motto that we didn't make public was, we will break you down and build you up the Grenville way. And so it was the
Oh,
breaking down. And I haven't even touched on the disciplines that took place there. And they
yeah.
were, soul crushing. So anyone just step out of line and the discipline is immediate, harsh, unpredictable, and indefinite. So you were always put into some sort of a discipline where you're pulled out of school, and it was indefinite until you changed from the inside. And how do you prove that you've sufficiently repented and changed? it's not easy. not when, not when we weren't like, I remember my first time on discipline, I was in grade 6, and my reason for being put on discipline was they told me I had a bad attitude. And all I knew was that I was very eager, ambitious student, wanting top grades. My brothers were really smart and I wanted to be just as smart as them. And they decided I had a bad attitude and I was haughty. And how do you change? How do you prove that, you're sufficiently different? Like working hard labor for day on day, day after day. And that was just the beginning of, decades of disciplines that were soul crushing. So, yeah.
So what would, if you can, if you feel comfortable sharing, so you're in grade 6, you're only like 11, 12 years old, and they're told you have this terrible haughty attitude. So you're pulled out of class, and then what? Are you scrubbing floors? Like what's happening?
So number one, you weren't allowed. You're pulled out of class, not able to go to classes indefinitely. You're not allowed to wear the uniform. So right away, there's a spotlight on you, a spotlight like a scarlet letter, if you will. Like everyone knows you're in trouble, and then they give you the dirtiest jobs they can think of in the school. And you're not allowed to talk to anyone or look at anyone, and usually you're working in the kitchen doing the things like scrubbing the baseboards or the floors, or the worst, the grossest pans, or cleaning out the freezers or something like that. And, I remember one time I was on discipline for 29 days before they finally decided to actually expel me and send me to the headquarters in Cape Cod. But while I was on for 29 days, they ran out of ideas. So they had me cleaning the dumpster outside, inside the dumpster. I'd take out all the garbage and then clean the walls of the dumpster. And I still shudder because, there was a dead crow in there. And it was just awful. It was, but like I said, you're not just working really terrible jobs, but you're feeling like you're drowning in shame, because no one's allowed to talk to you, and you're not allowed to eat with anyone. And, just like, it was awful. And also you're missing out on your schooling. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And then, if it's, pardon me, some kind of made up sin that you're guilty of in the first place, how do you sufficiently prove to them that, actually, no, I'm not haughty? Of course, you weren't anyway. You were just, as you said, you were ambitious. School is supposed to reward you for working hard, for wanting to be the best in the class. So they're simultaneously saying, you must work as hard as possible, but also we will punish you for working as hard as possible. It's a double bind. There's no way you can win that.
Yeah. And in fact, it wasn't until the trial when I got to hear a very brave administrator who was the only one who came forward to speak on our behalf. And she was sort of next in line to the headmaster. She saw the error of her ways, and she came forward and spoke on the stand and really broke open our case. But she explained what I had never understood, which was, it was a sin to be doing well. It was a sin to be, they called me haughty all the time, but they weren't, actually, when I think about it, the mothers, one of their biggest core philosophies, if you will, was like, the key is death to self. And they would preach that you are nothing of yourself. You can do nothing. So if someone was seen to be doing well, they had to be brought down 5 pegs, or, taken out at the knees, if you will. So you're right. On one hand, we were expected to be excellent, the best of the best. On the other hand, we were never allowed to think we're doing well. So anyone who was a good student or talented would be extra targeted. And that's what made it very difficult for a lot of us. And we didn't understand, well, how could you understand that?
It makes no sense at all.
I know.
Yeah. Do you think girl students were targeted more than boys, or do you think it was just equal horrible mistreatment?
They were targeted differently. They got the brunt of the purity culture. So the boys would be told, you have no power against women's temptation. So guard against them. But the girls, we were told it was our fault if anyone assaulted us or mistreated us or raped. It was our fault, and it was our responsibility to ensure that men never looked at us with, lust. And and then we also had an expert who came to speak on our defense, who talked about the various abuses, and she said that we were very sexualized abuse. So anytime a woman is or a girl is told that, she's shamed for her body, shamed for the way she looks, we were, I experienced the, bend over so we can see if your cleavage shows, or, that sort of thing. So, and don't even get me started about the way young women were taught, were referred to as whores, Jezebels, bitches in heat, just for being pretty. I mean, and I had forgotten this because I dissociated a lot. So it took me years to get the memories back, even while we were going through depositions for years. And I'd forgotten that they had made me go get my hair cut really short because it was, I guess, too pretty. So what they didn't give that excuse, but they did that to boarding student girls with, in the 70s with hair down to their waist. They'd take them to town, get their hair cut right off short, and they'd, tell them that was because in the Bible, whores had their heads shaved. So, oh
my God. It's so invasive that they would do that. That is, and the whole idea, and this purity culture just drives me up the freaking wall. It's boys are taught that they have a problem. Girls are taught that they are the problem. And this is such a profound and internalized terrible messaging. So I gotta put a plug in here for the Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture Conference. I'm going to be hosting it in May in Seattle.
I wish I could go
from now. Oh yeah, it's going to be really, really good. But the whole, religious trauma is one thing, and then the purity culture is a whole additional element to religious trauma. And people who don't grow up steeped in it, it's harder for them to understand. That's one reason I'm so grateful for your book, because it really helped me understand some things that I wouldn't have necessarily had access to when you're telling your firsthand stories about what it's like to be publicly shamed, about what it's like to be made to climb into a dumpster when you're a kid and pull out the garbage and clean, or, sometimes you told a pretty scary story about a furnace having that likened to hell. And it was very hot, obviously, even physically, to be in close proximity. It's like the mothers and the people who were at the top running the school, it's like they were gleeful, almost sadistic in their power that they
had. Yeah, I think when I think about it, I'm like, what was the end game? And I really think that it was to break people's spirits so that they could be easily controlled.
Yeah.
And when we were drowning in shame, they had done their job. Like that was the point. And I do feel that, I love that your whole platform is divorcing religion. I mean, and so many people listen to you because they have come out of a system where they were meant to drown in shame, and that the only way to heaven is to live in hell, and deny yourself every possible instinct to, to thrive. And yeah, it it doesn't make any sense, but that that was the core philosophy, I guess. Why be so cruel to people? But they don't see it either. Like my mom, she still doesn't see it. She says she supports me, but then she constantly talks about her religion. And even today I was talking to her. I guess I'm getting off topic, but
oh no, that's okay.
She said she got in a scam, and was told, she got an email from her minister, and it said, we need to raise money. Can you buy a bunch of gift cards for this cause or whatever?
There we go. Yes.
Which she did. And luckily, my dad emailed the gift cards to the actual minister, who said they didn't know anything about it, right? But I'm asking my mom, like, why would you give hundreds and hundreds of dollars when you don't have the money? Why would you do that? I said, you've already given your entire life to God. And look how that turned out. And she said, oh, but God died on the cross for me. And Jesus loves me so much. I'm like, Jesus, you could also say that Jesus ruined your life, because the way my parents were terribly abused. I mean, I get into that a little bit in the book, but our whole family was decimated. And the damage that was done it's you can't even quantify it. But my mom's still, she's still hooked.
Yeah, the indoctrination was deep, and the devastation was deep. And I think then it can be even harder for parents to be willing to accept responsibility that their children suffer directly as a result of the beliefs of the parent. I mean, I just want to say to your mom, Jesus doesn't need your gift cards, but I understand how people get sucked into that trap. And of course, the whole authoritarian thing, that's what makes believers extremely vulnerable. That's why your parents were vulnerable, because I'm thinking of Christianity, because of course, that's how I grew up. And we're really taught that there has to be proper authority. And typically that authority has to come from a man. So that's what makes the cult a little bit different with the mothers there. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit.
Sure.
You grew up, did all your schooling at this school, and there's almost a love-hate relationship there, only because it's all you've known. You didn't want to be abused. No one wants to be abused, but you also didn't know necessarily what it was like to live in a free kind of way. And so after you graduated, you stayed on board, which I'm sure they must have touted as the godliest thing person can do then, is to stay on board and help train the next generation for Christ, or whatever they say.
Well, we were under immense pressure. Basically, they told, like in any cult, you are not allowed to leave. So the staff kids, we were told, if you leave, you're going straight to hell. And we were taught that for years and years. It was, by the time I was 18 or 19, I didn't even question it. There was not even a thought of leaving in my mind. And to the extent that I think I was 24 when my grandfather died, and he left me $40,000, which was a fortune. And I just gave, I donated a lot of it, but then I invested the rest. And I never even imagined using that money to leave. But he had gifted me the keys to my freedom, and I didn't know that until things got way worse, and I finally left when I was 31. But that's how brainwashed I was, because not only, and before he died, he actually invited me to come to his town where they had a university, and he would pay for my whole university education.
He was not brainwashed by the college.
No, he wasn't. And this is why they try to separate, like once you get into a cult, you're supposed to cut ties with the outside relatives, which my parents were forced to do. And we rarely saw my grandparents. But he must have seen that what was going on and was really worried about it. But I was told that, he was the devil tempting me. And, you better say no. And so I did. I said, no thanks, but no thanks to him. But yeah, I stayed on as staff. And do you want me to talk about why I left finally? Or
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
My 20s never got easier. It actually, in the lawsuit, we only could talk about our high school years, because we were trying to prove that the high school students were damaged and abused. But in my 20s, I mean, the abuse just kept getting more cruel and unusual. And it got to the point where I started to realize that I might never be happy there. And that was a very rebellious thought, like who cares if you're never happy? Like, this is your calling, right? But and so with that being said, things got worse, when I lost hope by age 27, I'd lost hope of ever getting married there, because we weren't allowed to marry outsiders. And there were a lot more young women than there were men. And so that made it so much worse when my fiance, I did actually get engaged to someone, he broke it off, and he was my office coworker. So that was even worse. He broke it off.
Oh my God.
Without any explanation. And I was shocked, but I went into a deep depression. And I mean, I knew there were no men left, and I could just see myself being a spinster for life. And I was pushing 30 and I was still a virgin. It was just hard to take. Just say. So that sent me right down a deep depression, and I couldn't see living like that, and I didn't know what to do. But side note, that fiance went on to be a monk at the Community of Jesus, where my brother also is, and they're still there to this day.
And is that in Cape Cod?
Yeah. And they take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience for life. So anyway, then after the breakup, I had knee surgery, which is totally unrelated. But as part of the healing process, I was allowed to go to physio, and then the physio doctors recommended Aquafit. So I got to go to the YMCA out off campus, and that started to open up the world to me. I met people, I got strong and fit, and I started to feel like a caged animal. And I didn't want to stop going there. So I asked if I could become a fitness instructor, and I got my certification. And then I started teaching fitness classes off campus. So it was like, I started to feel free.
Wow.
And I started to question everything. And I won't get into all the details. It's in my book. But what's interesting is it took me 3 years to make the break. By the time I was a fitness instructor, it took me 3 more years to decide that if I was going to hell, as they told me I would, then that was that. I mean, that so be it, because I couldn't stay. And interestingly enough, I didn't leave thinking that they were wrong or abusive. I thought I was the wrong one. I thought I was like the black sheep in the white flock who was rebellious. And it was very painful to leave, because I left anyone I'd ever known, and I left my family and my support system. But I just couldn't live a double life, and I didn't see how I could fit there anymore. So, yeah, that's why I left.
And you were it must have been so vulnerable, because that was literally all you had. Yeah, all you had known, and the rest of the world does not function that way. The rest of the world doesn't. They're not caught up in concern about sinning or hurting other people.
No. And I mean, Yeah. I don't wish that. Like, that's a really tough process. I still have nightmares about Grenville pretty much every night. But one scenario that often shows up in my nightmares is that time period of that transition, because it was so scary and so I just didn't know what to do or who to turn to, and yeah, that's really tough to leave.
Wow.
But
And you became not just a fitness instructor. You actually did end
Mhm.
up getting your degree from Queens and becoming sure.
Yeah.
But and it sounds like you were an excellent fit for teaching. And unfortunately, there are still predatory people out in the world who are not part of religious cults, and sometimes sociopaths and predators rise to the top in different organizations and can make our lives hell.
Mhm.
We escape one thing, and sometimes through no fault of our own, end up also in very difficult situations. And that's similar to some of the things you talk about that happened after you managed to leave. So I don't want to give too much away because it really is an excellent book. Um,
Well,
but what do you think about that?
yeah, I mean, I think you're alluding to the principle that
Mhm.
put me right back and triggered me right out of my mind. Well, all I'll say is that, for the listeners, there's quite a story there. I guess just to generalize is when you leave a cult and you do what I did, which was I tried to outrun my trauma. I didn't realize I was doing that, but I thought, okay, I'm going to put it behind me. I'm going to jump on the fast pass and race to catch up to everybody, basically. And I became an overachiever. Well, I already was, but I relied on that to cope, if you will. And in so doing, I was really trying to escape the trauma that I'd never processed. And so I became super teacher, as you mentioned, and that put a spotlight on me. And I had one principal who actually had befriended us. Friends of Grenville who were defending the
Oh,
school and who
oh
were
no.
actively bad mouthing the lawsuit. And
Wow.
so, in fact, she was the next door neighbor to some of these people. So she made my life hell at the school. And yeah. So, but it took me years to put that together. And it was just incredibly triggering. And along that note, I mean, I think it'd be useful just to talk about some things that I've learned not to do in recovery
Yeah.
because like one of them is, yeah, don't try to outrun your trauma. You've got, as soon as you realize that you may have been in a cult or may have been damaged by religious abuse, you have trauma that's going to catch up to you. And you have, like, I used to think that the leaders can't hurt me anymore because they're in my past, but they were in my head. Their voices are stuck in my head, and I've got a brain that's attacking me from the inside. So that doesn't go away unless you get help. And there are so, like from you, there are lots of places now off the internet. Thank God you can look. You can do some research and find some incredible resources. It wasn't so easy when I left in 2001,
Right.
but and it's never easy either. Like, don't get me wrong, even with the resources. But and another thing is, if you have addictions, that it's not your fault, but you will need help. And I finally got diagnosed with bulimia and PTSD, which has since been changed to complex PTSD.
Mhm.
But I remember the first time I met with the psychologist who was going to treat me, she told me, Beth, we're not going to touch your eating disorder with a 10-foot pole because there's so much more going on underneath. And I looked at her thinking, I was puzzled because I thought, like, is there a reason why I can't stop binging apart from my sin? Like, I
Oh.
mean, I'm just a sinner. Like I had no clue, So there's so much that you have to dig in and like to uncover the layers and layers. And honestly, I think it's a lifetime of work for many of us.
Mhm.
Another thing I've learned is that if you've been abused by religion, don't turn to the church for help. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, but
Yes.
but so many people, like I did that. I left Grenville thinking, okay, I was so lonely, desperate for community of like-minded people. So I started searching for another church. And
Mhm.
I couldn't understand why every time I took my kids to church, I would cry. I just was like, what is going on here? And it took me, you know what? Actually, the key to my freedom was my son's hockey schedule because I couldn't go to church and hockey at the same time. And I finally realized, you know what? I don't need to be killing myself to take the kids there, even though I thought that meant they would go to hell. At that point, I still believe that. I just chose the hockey, so I guess that's the lesson: put your kids in hockey.
Wow.
But
You are a Canadian.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And then
Wow.
another thing that I've learned is medications are really like I did not do my homework. I got lucky that I got a psychiatrist and a psychologist, but we tried all kinds of medications to try to deal with my anxiety, and they weren't working. So I ended up on benzos with the psychiatrist's, prescription. And I took those for about 10 years before I started having terrible memory issues and
wow.
and realized I needed to get off. And the process of withdrawal from benzodiazepines is so debilitating that some people can never actually go off. And some people, just from going through that, are put on needing disability for the rest of their life. It can be so difficult. And I lost the ability to cope and function for years. And then I had to fight with insurance company for disability. So I don't wish that on anyone. I'm just saying, be careful, because the medications are lovely, but they're just masking the pain that has to be dealt with. And it caught up with me when I had to go. That's when it caught up. When I went through the withdrawal. That's when I realized I haven't dealt with all of this stuff.
Were you married and had kids then by that time?
By that time, I was 49, and yeah, my kids were teenagers. And but prior to then, I'd been racing through life trying to outrun the past. You can't do it. It's just like I tried, and the last thing I'll say is with eating disorders, the one thing I've learned, like I've been trying to, fix myself since, one of the disciplines I haven't mentioned, when I was 5, I was told that one of the leaders told me I was too fat and too gluttonous and I needed to go on a diet. So that
at 5 years old.
Yes. And that has affected me more than anything else that happened at Grenville. Like I am still trying to get over this, this eating disorder, and I'm close. But what I will say is, through everything I've tried, the thing that I'm finally realizing is that you have to give up control of your food, and you have to learn how to become an intuitive eater. And it's scary as hell for those of us who are trying to fix ourselves. But you also have to feel and process the pain of all of the trauma with diets, because they are traumatic. And there's hope, though. And if anyone can get, like, I'm close. I'm very close to saying that I used to have an eating disorder, but I'm not quite there. I still work with a nutritionist who is in England. I text her all the time, and it's all I can say is there is hope, but you have to. It's a really difficult and slow process, and you have to be very, very patient and loving with yourself. And yeah. Anyway, these are some things I did wrong, if you will. So,
thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Yes. And I think part of it also, the Christianity, well, I'll just say religious fundamentalism, could
Hmm.
be any religion, is so intense and all consuming,
Yep.
reaching into every aspect of our brain, our life, our body. So then, fast forward to years later when we finally managed to extricate ourselves from whatever the particular cult is or the culty type religious groups. And then the temptation is to just transfer that level of intensity
Yep.
to our new life. And then it's just like you said, running as fast as we can, trying to outrun the past there. But particularly if we're talking about many years, decades spent
Hmm.
in the group, especially if we're indoctrinated in childhood, as you were and
Hmm.
as I was, um, running, just trying to outrun it isn't going to work. It's going to catch up
Yeah.
eventually, and it's going to show up in different ways for different people.
Yeah.
So enlist the help of a qualified secular therapist or people you might be. So church sets us up. Church is like the one-stop shop. We get everything we
Yeah.
need from church and Christianity. Real life isn't like that. Our life looks more like a patchwork quilt, or where we're
Hmm.
having to take from this part and take from this part. So we have a nutrition coach and we have a psychologist, and
Yeah.
we gather our team around us to help, and that's
It
part of
really
how we
is
heal.
teamwork. Yeah, it really
Yeah.
does require a lot of people. I've had a lot of help from different, and now that you can do Zoom therapy, you can get.
Hmm.
I had a woman who helped me for a couple of years who was in Australia. I mean, she helped me process diet related trauma. We even did some like hypnotherapy online. Like it was
Hmm.
amazing, and the crying. Oh my god! But you're right. It takes a village to recover, and I hope that my book helps shed some light on how how difficult that is. Like I had read so many memoirs about people getting out, and I thought, oh, good for them. That was a great story. But what happened next? Like, are they anything like me? Are they still struggling 20 years later? What's wrong with me? Like, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
realizing, no, I'm normal. This just takes a long time. And even
Mm-hmm.
when you're determined to make it happen. And I think with Christianity and maybe other religions, there's such a huge emphasis on perfection and, you know, um, doing everything according to the expectations. So we think we can fix ourselves, but we can't. Like the more we try to fix ourselves, the worse it gets. And
Mm-hmm.
and using shame to fix yourself does not work.
Oh, that's the truth. That is the truth. And we do have our blind spots. I mean, even therapists need therapists. If you're working with a therapist, that therapist should have a therapist, because
Yeah.
mental health clinicians can suffer vicarious trauma. And we also have our own nonsense from our past that we are,
Yeah.
coming to terms with, and we can be triggered and all these other things. So I'm really glad to know that you have so many helpers on your team that you're working with, and you choose to maintain a relationship with your parents, and they still, remain somewhat entrenched as far as their religious beliefs. So it's not like it's an easy a particularly easy relationship. So you love them, they love you. There may have even been some apologies along the way, but it's obvious that mom doesn't fully get it if she continues bringing up
Yeah.
religion.
I mean, I'm part of your support group, and I hear people's stories, and I won't go into them, but it seems to be a common thread that it's very painful if you're the one leaving. Oops, if you're the one leaving. Sorry, I just hit my mic.
No problem.
And your family is still entrenched, and it's the question of like, how much do I let them back into my life? Oh, is this even like my therapist? If it were up to her, I would have nothing to do with my parents, because it's very painful. You know, even a conversation like I had today, I was like screaming in the forest, like, oh my God. so frustrated with, after all this, my parents have read my memoir. They know so much about what, where I stand, and yet they're not able to see it. And so, where am I going with this? I'm just, I guess it's that the other thing is when we were dismantled as a family, the bonds were broken. So, I mean, I care about my parents, but we were taught it was a sin to love each other. And I still have trouble. I can barely say I love you to them. It feels weird and strange. And yet I adore my own children. I feel that love, it's just it's just impossible to describe how much love I have for my kids. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So, but that was broken. And that's the thing, I hope people take from my story is that people are breakable. And when leaders intentionally break people through coercive control or weaponized religion, sometimes the damage is permanent. And I don't know that, in the case of me and my parents, I'm okay with them. We get we're civil. But when I think of my brother, I've got a younger brother who's been on the streets, homeless, in psych wards and jail for 20 years. Almost more like 25. He's in jail right now. He was completely broken by our school and by our leaders. And my parents stood by and let it happen. So,
Wow.
and he's just one of many. So,
and another brother's still in the cult, even more deeply.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. The damage is just incredible. And everybody who is on their own journey of recovery gets to make the decision of what they think is best for them. Some people feel that they need for their own mental health and safety to go no contact with family members or people, other cult members, and some people don't need to go that route. I think what's really important is acceptance of reality. So you fully see, you're very much aware of the flaws that your parents have, and you see that your mom is still gripped extremely tightly by her belief system. So you don't have this fantasy of one day it's going to all be like it was when I was 3 instead of when I was 4, when we were a healthy family, because you just can't go back. It's not going to happen. So you recognize, the bonds have been broken. And people have been broken. Sounds like writing the book was challenging, very hard actually, and cathartic in some ways for you as well. It was a part of your healing to write.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like I said, I joined the lawsuit back in, 2007. I didn't start writing till 2021. So in those years, as I said, I was racing through life trying to outrun everything. I was dealing with the lawsuit, so I was having to sort of laser focus in on the abuse, but I never actually dealt with the trauma that was there. And when I went through benzo withdrawal, I had to quit working. I couldn't handle teaching, and for a couple of years, all I could do was barely function. I couldn't even. I barely could shower. So when I started writing a couple of years into the recovery, it was 20 minutes a day I could handle. But it very quickly started to make me realize the writing was what I needed. It would unlock memories that I had completely dissociated from. And scenes would open up like magic. I'd completely remember things that I'd forgotten. And to your point, it took about, I think, 2-3 years since then to write the manuscript, but it was so healing. I was just crying a lot while I wrote, but when I cried, I mean, I could feel myself processing, and I'd leave the room feeling like I had let go of something. Do you know what I mean? And it was
Wow.
just like day by day. It took all that
Powerful.
time. But for me, that was what I needed to actually get to the next level of healing. So I'm not saying everyone has to write a memoir, because let me tell you, publishing nearly killed me. But
Yeah. Yeah, the publishing aspect.
but the writing was just transformational. It was, there's nothing like it. Yeah.
Right. And let's also give a shout out to our pets, because having animals is also, it can be deeply, deeply therapeutic and healing. You talk about going out to yell in the forest about your frustrations with your mom. And I'm like, oh, I bet one of her dogs was with her when she did that. Like you have dogs and you're close to your dogs.
My dog, I have Harry, Hermione, and Ron is the therapeutic. He's the therapy dog. If he can hear me crying, like, he wakes up from a dead sleep and demands to lick my face. So it's the most sweet thing. I mean, he was there at my side, the entire writing process.
I'm so glad. Well, thanks for taking time out of your schedule to talk with me and share about your experiences, what it's been like to continue growing in your recovery from the harms that you did survive. And I think people will feel hope that you have made it through so much, and you have managed to raise children, be a loving partner. You're still a daughter, you're still a sister, and now you're an author. Maybe you'll be a best-selling author. I hope that everybody runs out to pick up your book. Tell us again the name of your book and how people can contact you.
Awesome. My book is Born and Raised, Razed, and the subtitle is Surviving the Cult Was Only Half the Battle. And you can find me, my website is bethgranger.ca. And from there you can find my Facebook and Instagram and Substack.
Nice.
The book will be coming out on February 19th in paperback and audiobook soon after, also ebook. And I'd love to hear from people. If the book makes an impact, I really, really would appreciate hearing from people.
Awesome. That is so great. And you mentioned earlier that I do offer a support group, and I do. I offer it online. It's free. People just fill out an application form at my website, divorcingreligion.com. And if people are recovering from religious trauma and they feel like they could use some extra help, please go to divorcingreligion.com and set up a free consultation with me. I would love the opportunity to work with you. Beth Granger, thank you so much. I appreciate you. I hope one day we get to meet in person.
So do I. I would love to come to especially your conference. That would be amazing, because we didn't even get into how purity culture affected me. But
that'll be for another podcast. That's a great idea. And people can go to shamelesssexuality.org to check out the Shameless Sexuality Conference. And with that, I will sign off. So thanks again, Beth, for joining me today. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.